old style solar panel. If you haven't seen one before, they're a very old style solar panel. And I'll leave it here. People can actually touch and see. The educator, you have to be able to see it.
Elevate Energy do amazing things. They're all over the web. You can find them. Please connect with him as well. How many people have ever been to a national park in your journeys around the country? A lot of us, right? It was signed in the Congress to set that land aside for us to enjoy. Brian's the one that signed it in. We have the national parks because of Brian, so we're very fortunate.
Right, Brian.
Here you go.
Thank you. Apparently, I look pretty young because I'd be Teddy Roosevelt, I suppose, if that were the case. So sure. How do we get it full screen? Not full screen. There we go. Okay, I think we're okay.
That was not me that did that.
Yep. Great. Well, thank you so much, Mark. I've seen old style. This doesn't look like old style to me. I don't know. I heard this old style solar panel. I was expecting something a little more can-shaped. But my name is Brian Granahan. I'm with the Illinois Power Agency. How many people have heard of the Illinois Power Agency, or IPA? That's way more than we usually get a lot of times. We go and talk with people for reasons that I'll explain now. So we're an agency that's only about 10 years old. We were created in 2007 as a sister agency to the state's Public Utilities Commission, the Illinois Commerce Commission, or ICC. How many people have heard of the ICC? So a few more. So there we go. So people familiar with the Utility Billing Commission. That was great. We're in a bit of an odd spot. There aren't a lot of other state agencies like ours around the country, and we removed the oversight of the state's Executive Ethics Commission in 2011. Essentially what happened was the speaker wasn't terribly happy with the director, and the governor wasn't terribly happy with the speaker, and they wanted to put the IPA in a place where it would be structurally insulated. And the EEC is a place that adjudicates ethics complaints against executive branch officials. So it can't really be under the governor's office. It's a commission comprised of 10 different appointees. I think no more than 6 can be from any one party. Other statewide office holders have to go to appoint people to the EEC. So we're actually under their oversight. And as a result, our director was appointed back in 2013 for the first time. He's not an appointee of the governor's office. He's an appointee of a commission that really doesn't understand what it is that we do, which is always great. So we were established initially, especially as I'll explain, to prepare procurement plans and conduct procurement events to meet supply requirements that we call the eligible retail customers. These are customers who are on default supply service. How many of you know who your electricity supplier is? I hope this is a pretty good number. So it's maybe half or so. You may be a customer of an alternative retail electric supplier, you may be on hourly pricing, or you may be on default supply. The default supply option is available only to residential and small commercial customers. It's kind of the default option essentially for those customers. So if you're with ComEd, not if you get a bill from ComEd because we have consolidated billing, but if you get supply from ComEd, we actually put together plans and conduct procurement events to procure that electricity. Then they're bound under the contracts to buy electricity at the rates that come through our competitive procurement process. This is in large part because our state's distribution utilities are owned by companies that own large generating fleets. Exelon owns 6 nuclear plants. Exelon also owns Commonwealth Edison, their distribution utility. So it kind of makes sense to have some other entity sitting between them when they go out and competitively procure power for their default supply customers. As part of that in 2007, we were tasked with implementing the state's Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard, or RPS, as it's called, shorthand. And most of that was conducting competitive procurement events for large-scale procurements to meet annual targets. But that's changed over time. There were some responsibilities bolted on in 2009 regarding compliance for alternative suppliers, where those entities then started paying fees into a state fund that we administer, in addition to going out and procuring RECs on their own. But the biggest changes for the agency came with the bill that Lisa had described, the Future Energy Jobs Act. That was passed by the Illinois General Assembly on December 1st, 2016, signed by the governor December 7, 2016, and then took effect June 1st, 2017. It gave our agency a whole host of new responsibilities, and we have spent the last 14 months or so pretty much working around the clock trying to implement some of those things. So among them are developing the adjustable block program along the lines of what we described previously to support the development of distributed generation and community solar. And those things will hopefully allow the state to be covered with solar panels in a way that is reflected in other states. So as I mentioned, the eligible retail customers, this is who we traditionally procure for. They're not customers who receive supply from Aries. They're not the hourly pricing customers. But one of the more confusing things about it is we don't actually know how much of the market we're serving for energy procurements year to year, because you have customers switching between alternative retail electric supplier service and customers on default supply service. And with municipal aggregation, you have whole communities that are switching over at once. So as a result, you end up with this huge variance in terms of the amount of electricity that we have under contract versus what's actually needed to meet those supply requirements. And we have a hedging strategy that starts to account for that, but it does start to create problems with the RPS, as I'll get into, which informs some of the changes that took place through the bill. We procure standard wholesale products, block energy and capacity primarily for those utilities. It's all just background on the agency. There are three primary policy drivers for distributed solar development in Illinois. REC revenues are probably primary among them, in addition to net metering. So we had different ways under the old RPS regime of trying to facilitate new distributed generation through REC procurements. There were a set of supplemental photovoltaic procurements that were conducted in 2015 and 2016, where we bought $30 million off of the state fund, conducted competitive procurement events. Entities came in, offered bids, and the winners through that process, with the bid selected on the basis of price, got 5-year REC delivery contracts at the price that they bid in. And that helped facilitate some development in Illinois, probably 25 to 30 megawatts or so, but that pales in comparison to some of the targets that we have right now. We also conducted a few distributed generation specific procurements for the utilities. The utilities of the counterparty looks a lot like what we did in the supplemental photovoltaic procurement process. We have a 5-year REC contract, a competitive bidding process, parties bid in, they get the benefit of the REC contract, they can go out and they can put solar panels up knowing that they have that additional revenue coming in for selling off the environmental attributes associated with that system. But now with the adjustable block program, the Solar for All program, we have much more robust mechanisms in place to try to facilitate more development in Illinois. Net metering has been touched on. It's something I'll get into a little bit more a little bit later. There's some interesting issues there regarding the net metering cap. When that gets hit, we would no longer have retail rate net metering for smaller customers, new smaller customers at least, at that point. And then there's rebates available as well. These aren't available for residential customers yet. Eventually, when we hit the net metering cap, those will become available, as I'll explain, but they are available for larger projects, including those that don't qualify for retail rate net metering, and so they do offer a better option there. Prior to the passage of the legislation in 2016, the awkwardly named FEJA, we had 3 different compliance mechanisms under our state's Renewable Portfolio Standard. The first of which is probably the most straightforward. We had a surcharge on the bills of customers who took supply from the electric utility with a 2.015% rate impact cap that effectively gives you an annual budget. But the problem with that system is you have an annual budget then that varies year to year. As customers switch from default supply service going to an alternative supplier and back, your budget goes up and down and up and down. And not only is that a major pain from a planning standpoint, it's a horrible situation when you have REC delivery contracts for 20 years that then you can't actually meet the obligations of without violating the rate impact cap. And this, in fact, is a situation that we ran into in, I believe it was 2014, 2015, for some wind projects where they had about 15% of their contract value could no longer be paid. And they had the benefit of contracts. There were projects that were built and financed based on those contracts, but those contracts ultimately had to be curtailed. The way that we went about planning procurements and figuring out how we were going to spend those funds was very similar to what we do for energy, where we basically spend a month developing this procurement plan, we put it out for public comment, we take a bunch of comments on it, we litigate that before the Illinois Commerce Commission as a quasi-judicial body that oversees the process. That plan gets approved, then we spend the next few months preparing and conducting competitive procurement events. That process still kind of remains in the post-FEJA world, but only for large utility scale systems. We had different obligations for hourly pricing customers. They had alternative compliance they made. We decided to leverage those since they were collected and held, as opposed to subject to an annual budget where they'd be refunded if they weren't spent. We decided to use those for the distributed generation systems that I mentioned in the prior slide. And then for alternative suppliers, we had them going out and essentially procuring RECs for themselves for up to 50% of their obligation at the lowest price they could possibly find by and large. And this meant that they were getting RECs from projects anywhere within PJM and MISO. And it meant that they may be taking advantage of projects whose are in vertically integrated states where their costs are being recovered through rates. So really that's just pure margin for the project holder, or it's a refund for the ratepayers in that state. So that process wasn't really the best process. You had these 3 separate funds that if you could take all of these things together and combine them into one centralized planning mechanism, maybe you could really do some things with it. Now we did, as I mentioned, get a few things done in the prior regime, including those 2010 long-term power purchase agreements that had to be curtailed. These were actually bundled contracts for rec and energy, and not just rec contracts at a bid-in price. And a lot of the wind farms you see across the state as you go through central and southern Illinois were facilitated by this procurement event. The supplemental photo procurement event and the distributed generation procurement event, which is unfortunately called the general procurement, those both facilitated some rooftop solar across the state, but not nearly at the scale that you've seen in states like New Jersey, like Massachusetts, that don't necessarily have a better solar resource than Illinois, and certainly not like what you see in a place like California, which has a better solar resource, but also has better public policy options. So Public Act 99-0906 was the product of probably 2.5 years of negotiations. And it really began with a lot of the environmental groups saying, look, our RPS is broken, and trying to introduce bills year after year saying, we have these 3 separate ways in which we're funding the development of renewable energy generation. The process isn't working. We've reached a point where we're saturated in the one fund, so we can't fund any new build because we can't enter into any new long-term contracts since we can't pay for the ones that we already have. And these other compliance mechanisms, they're not set up thinking about the long term in a way that allows you to actually use the money that's available to facilitate the development of new generation. So they've been introducing bills pretty much year after year, 2014, trying to fix that problem. You had Exelon that owned a few nuclear plants that were in the red, largely because of low energy prices, largely because of low natural gas prices, and they wanted to have some sort of mechanism for receiving the value of the environmental attributes of their generation, which is low carbon generation. There's a lot of people who have issues with nuclear generation and other fronts from an environmental standpoint, but under other regimes like a cap and trade system, you'd see nuclear plants benefiting from this. They said, well, hold on a second, we should be doing something for nuclear as well. And this resulted in a large negotiation over a number of years. There were a number of points where it wasn't clear whether the bill was going to pass, but eventually it did pass, and it included a whole host of things intended to change our energy sector in Illinois, including preserving the nuclear plants that might be at risk. That's the last line there, with the creation of a zero emission standard that looks a lot like our Renewable Portfolio Standard, but was specific to nuclear. But then it also expanded and consolidated our state's Renewable Energy Standard. So now those 3 buckets, essentially, over the course of 2 years from the effective date, become one as they're assessed through a delivery services charge, and they're not linked to your supply source or who your supplier is. It also took money that was sitting in a state fund, made up of payments made by the alternative suppliers, and said we're going to use this for low-income solar projects. It allowed net metering for customers subscribed to community solar facilities. That should hopefully facilitate the development of the sorts of facilities that Lisa had mentioned, where you could subscribe to the facility, a great option if you can't have solar on your rooftop, a smart inverter rebate for larger distributed generation facilities, and then also changes to our state's energy efficiency standard that should hopefully allow for more funding to go through in funding various building measures to increase the energy efficiency of buildings. Lisa touched on some of this. The big changes for solar, the first few might not be as interesting. We're conducting initial forward procurements for large utility scale projects. So you might be interested not from a passive house standpoint, but just from a general curiosity standpoint, that we're conducting these competitive procurement events, the initial forward procurements that are designed to get 1 million RECs of wind and 1 million RECs of utility scale or brownfield site solar under contracts. That's 1 million RECs delivered annually. Applying a capacity factor of, I'm not even sure the number will be, but it comes out to about 650 megawatts of new solar just through this single procurement process. Again, as Lisa mentioned, we're talking about a state in Illinois that has about 75 megawatts of solar currently installed across the entire state. These procurement events, which are currently taking place, we just completed the second one, the results of it were approved today, are intended to facilitate the development of some 650 megawatts of new solar generation. So what this means is within the next 3 or 4 years, you are going to see large-scale, utility-scale solar projects across Illinois, perhaps concentrated in a few areas, but more along the lines of what you see in a state like Nevada and other places that have really focused on building large-scale projects. Those contribute to quantitative targets for new solar, 2 million RECs by 2020, then up to 4 million by 2030. So again, assuming we're applying the same capacity factor, you're talking about thousands of megawatts of generation coming online. Half of that for solar coming through the adjustable block program, which is focused only on distributed generation systems and on community solar. Our agency, the IPA, little old us, only 10 years old, gets to develop and administer these programs. We've never really done programs before, so this is very new for us. We've traditionally just done competitive procurements, and that's true for the adjustable block program and the Illinois Solar for All program. And how we do this is essentially folding all of these things in to what's called our long-term renewable resources procurement plan. Going back to what I mentioned previously, the prior regime wasn't really set up to think about these issues in the long term. The current regime has us pour our long-term thinking into a standalone plan that's litigated separate from everything else that we do on energy and electricity. It allows us to propose programs, incentive levels, contract terms, everything else associated with the development of the program through that plan. One thing about that plan though, and what we do is it's just the REC piece of it. I have some slides in net metering, but if you have one of these utility scale projects, you need to find an offtake for your energy somewhere else. We're only really dealing with the REC component of it, and that's true as well for some of the other projects. But for distributed generation and community solar, the offtake is effectively done through your net metering, adoption net metering. So this long-term renewable resources procurement plan was developed over the summer of 2017, published for comments in late September. Put out, we had 45 days of comments. We got 48 sets of comments, somewhere along those lines. Then we had to make a bunch of changes based on those comments and file it with the Illinois Commerce Commission for approval. That approval is expected in roughly, I think, 2 weeks, so April 3rd, 2018. And at that point, there's a window where parties could seek rehearing. But essentially what's gone on over the last 3 or 4 months or so is parties taking positions in the content of that plan, making those arguments in the form of legal briefs submitted before the ICC, and we've had maybe 25 or 30 contested issues of things we decided in the plan that we'll get resolution on come April 3rd. Some of these are actually pretty big issues. Lisa might have mentioned the eligibility of projects in municipal utility service territories or rural electric cooperatives for our adjustable block program is something that is currently before the ICC, and the proposed order found that those projects would be ineligible. And that's a problem. If you're in a place like Naperville or Batavia or St. Charles or Springfield or Cairo or across the whole wide swaths of central and southern Illinois served by rural electric cooperatives, you can't take advantage of the incentives in the adjustable block program should that decision be upheld. And while from a load standpoint or a population standpoint, it's not the majority of the state, it is geographically a significant portion of the state because much of central and southern Illinois is covered by rural cooperatives. So that's an issue that's getting a lot of attention. I think there's been a whole host of public comments put in to the commission on that particular point. We'll have to see what comes out of it. But the primary driver in this plan and in the law for new distributed solar is in this adjustable block program. And the idea of an adjustable block program is basically based on what's a declining block program in other states. We don't call it declining because we want it to be able to adjust. In an adjustable block program or declining block program, you have a block of capacity. Say it's 10 megawatts, 20 megawatts, 30 megawatts, whatever it is. And you have a set REC price for that block of capacity. And as systems come in and apply, they fill up that block. And when that block is filled, a new block opens. And that new block opens at a different price, usually a lower price. In our case, I think it's about a 4% lower price as you step down from blocks. Now, we have other ways to go out and adjust REC prices based on market conditions. We can do that within a 25% value, depending upon, without administrative approval, and then going bigger changes to REC prices, that requires commission approval. But the block essentially is an amount of capacity, and the entities that apply are what we call approved vendors. Approved vendors come in and they have to have at least 100 kilowatt of systems together. They also have to go through a training, they have to meet some certification requirements, they have to agree to abide by consumer protection terms that we set for them, they have to agree to certain contract terms that are outlined in our plan. But they come in and they pull together and effectively aggregate these distributed generation systems and say, okay, we're going to pull these together. Maybe we have 500 kilowatt of them and we're going to take advantage of this block while it's open. You bring them in, you receive the benefit through application of a contract, a 15-year contract for REC delivery at that adjustable block price that applies to the block that you're open. So the blocks are basically split up where you have a sub 10 kW block for distributed generation. So that's basically just your residential rooftop project. You have another block for everything from 10 kW up to 2 megawatts, and then you have a third block for community solar. Each of these blocks have slightly different price terms, but each of them has to constitute at least 25% of the program under the law. These also can't just be speculative systems that come in, they can't simply be conceptual, they have to actually come in and show that they've met certain requirements. So the benefit of participating in the program is a 15-year REC contract. The counterparty to that contract is not the state of Illinois, it's not your electricity provider necessarily, it is the electric utility. So depending upon the service territory that you're in, the electric utility is the one who's effectively paying the approved vendor for the RECs produced off of that system, the RECs being the environmental attributes decoupled from the energy. Now, one of the things that the law features for a couple of different reasons that should help facilitate the development and the rapid development of solar in Illinois is prepayment. If you have a system that's below 10 kW in size, once that system is energized and interconnected, it receives 100% prepayment for the full 15 years of RECs. That's pretty significant. So you're not getting paid as you deliver the RECs, you're getting paid entirely up front. Effectively, it operates more like a rebate as far as that goes. We do have collateral requirements to ensure that payments or that RECs are actually delivered since they're ultimately being retired by the utilities for a compliance obligation. But that amount of cash up front does two things. First, it helps project developers and facilitate the development of new systems. And second, it also means that to the extent we're looking at these budgets annually, we're getting that payment obligation off our books, and then that entry is available the next year, and we don't have just a pure stop and start like we might have if we ended up paying each of these things over the course of the full 15 years. At that point, then you have a budget that basically fills up based on prior projects. You can't do anything new, and the market, which grows very quickly, comes screeching to a halt. For larger systems and community solar systems, it's 20% upon interconnection energization. Then you have 4 subsequent payments that occur to give you the full value for the 15-year REC stream. We have a collateral requirement to ensure that delivery does indeed occur. The whole idea behind all of this is that you're getting this capital up front to pay you for the environmental attributes of these systems, and we're helping facilitate these systems come online, and we're leveraging ratepayer funds collected through delivery service charge to be able to do so. Now, what are the REC prices? Well, we set those through a formula that's set forth in a long-term plan. We use a lot of data from NREL in order to figure this out. And essentially what we're looking at are all the different forms of revenue that a solar developer might have off of a project, all the different costs they might incur, using publicly available information to put that into a model. There's probably 14 adjustments that we made in our most recent filing about this, including an adjustment for the federal solar tariff. Yeah.
Random question. Do you know approximately when it will take for the 10 kilowatt systems or less to receive their check?
To receive their check? So in terms of relative to interconnection energization? Or?
Right.
Not at this point. The programs won't be open until late 2018. So we're at a point right now where the timeline for some of those things isn't necessarily clear at this point. It could be the case that it's fairly soon after. I don't think there's any specific timeline in the law, but there is a process through which the contracts do have to be approved by the Illinois Commerce Commission, but that shouldn't take all that long, and also a lot of energization will occur after a contract approval. So I wouldn't expect it to be a lot of lag. One other nice thing about this regime is that these aren't state funds. So when we have dealt with state funds, there's often a lag because if the state doesn't pass a budget, that means that the comptroller's office won't process payments out of your state fund, even if the money is still sitting in that state fund. You don't have the authorization through appropriation to spend it. Part of the design here is that these are all utility-held funds held pursuant to a surcharge, delivery services charge on customers' bills. They have the money, they make the payments. The state of Illinois does not have to provide some sort of separate authorization through the legislative process in order to do that. Having been through all of that with the budget fights in 2015, 2016, and I know Lisa, you probably had some projects that were involved in the supplemental photovoltaic procurement process where we had to see this counterparty to the contracts. It was not a pretty thing. It was not a good thing, and having the state not as a counterparty is certainly positive. So we've also made adders associated with small customer participation, community solar, and also small system size to account for additional issues there, or additional costs that might happen. So the application process, it would have to be through an approved vendor. They'd have to have at least 100 kilowatts of systems together for a bid. You could do this potentially if you met the requirements of the plan by pulling together your neighbors or your friends or working through other organizations. A lot of times what we see happen is various organizations that are specifically built around rec aggregation, they end up serving as something akin to an approved vendor in our prior processes. So that's basically their bread and butter. They understand the regulatory process. They are used to filling out the paperwork, and it works pretty well for them. There are a set of requirements, including the register to do business in Illinois, abiding by program terms and conditions, providing information on the agency's and the organization's history. Essentially, what we don't want to have happen with approved vendors is a situation similar to what we've seen with alternative retail electric suppliers in Illinois, where you have some, slightly shady entities going out and marketing above-market supply offers to customers who simply don't know any better. And there isn't always that accountability there because there hasn't been a look back to see at the issues that these entities have had in other states. We don't want to have that happen with who customers are interfacing with under the adjustable block program, so we have some safeguards in place to try to address that. Payment occurs upon energization and interconnection, as I mentioned previously, and there is a timeline after execution of the contract for a system to become energized, but there are extensions available for a fee. A project can't simply be a concept again. It actually has to have information about the system location and size, including technical specifications, site map, proof of site control. So we're not looking to have just concepts participating in this program. We want to have projects that are effectively lined up so they're not locking up funds that could be used toward projects that are actually going to occur. For systems over 25 kW, that includes the signed interconnection agreement and the obtaining of permits for those below 25 kW. We're hiring a third-party program administrator in order to help implement all of this. We're still in the process of doing this. This is just a laundry list of what some of their duties will be. The way we view this all looking in the long run is there'll be an online interface or an online portal where entities that want to participate in this process can see the status of a block online. They'll have an online dashboard that says, this block that has this much capacity at this price is 33% filled, or it's 40% filled, and you kind of get a sense of where you are as the program rolls along. Thankfully, there are some firms that have done this in other states and done this very well. We're going through an RFP process right now of trying to get the right one under contract. They'll also have annual reports they'll submit. They'll interface a lot with approved vendors. They'll develop a more public-facing program manual. And all of this we really see happening over the course of the summer and fall. So we have approved our plan in April, and then over the summer and fall, we're starting to build the infrastructure out for actually operating these programs. This is the block size. Lisa had a similar slide previously. So we have 22 megawatts in the Ameren, Illinois, and Mid-American service territory, and then 52 megawatt blocks for ComEd. Again, the Mount Carmel Rural Electric Cooperatives and munis are highlighted because their status is unclear, but if they were to be approved, then they would be set up in blocks in accordance with the RTO in which they exist. But the bottom line is, through Block 1, Block 2, and Block 3, we end up with 666 megawatts of new distributed solar and community solar across the state of Illinois. None of those projects can be larger than 2 megawatts in size. So you're talking about a lot of new solar projects, thousands and possibly tens of thousands of new solar projects rolling out across the state in the next 2 to 3 years. Lisa had this information previously as well. These are preliminary block prices. These are actually taken from the plan that we filed in September, and these have changed since, but I don't have a table that shows the changes. And they'll change also. We have to file final prices within 60 days of April 3rd. So the final prices, which can still be changed, but only within that 25% variance, will be available at the beginning of June. And at that point, they'll give you some sense of what the quality of the incentive is. So trying to think through, what does this actually mean? So let's say you're talking about a 5 kilowatt system on a rooftop, and you have the opportunity to take advantage of the ComEd price in Block 1. That's $74 per rec. That system may produce, 6 recs a year or so for a 5 kilowatt system. So you've got 15 years worth of 6 recs produced per year, maybe less because of degradation. Let's call it 90 recs. You're going to get the value of 90 recs at that price, or at least the approved vendor will, of $74. And that's very substantial when it comes to making the economics of a new solar project work out. Yep.
So that's still a lot of megawatts, 122 megawatts per each block. Is there a number, average kind of number for, is there going to be a 4th block, in other words?
Oh yeah, there'll be additional block as time goes on. One of the things that we've tried to do with this initial long-term renewable resources procurement plan, since it can be updated every 2 years, is really think about this in terms of the 2020 targets. So we had those quantitative targets earlier, 2 million RECs by 2020, 3 million RECs, and a premium associated with low-income project development. That premium probably varies between, I'd say, 20% to 40% off of the REC prices from the prior slide, but it's a higher structure overall, and they'll also be managed by a separate third-party program administrator. We're dedicating about, I think it comes out to about $30 million a year to the Illinois Solar for All Fund, the Illinois Solar for All programs, 20 of that from the Renewable Energy Resources Fund, and 10 of that from utility collective funds. So that's something they'll be rolling out concurrent with or slightly after the rollout of the adjustable block program. There are 4 programs, again, as I mentioned, very similar to what we have the adjustable block program for the first 2, plus dedicated funds for public facilities and nonprofits that we have some nexus with low-income interest, and then a separate process for low-income community solar pilot programs for pilot projects for community solar and low-income communities that involves electric utilities can bid on, it involves partnerships with local organizations, and we'll be putting out different RFP documents when we start to ramp that program up. So we touched a little bit on net metering before. I just want to run through this real quick. There's 3 main drivers of solar development. So net metering is available only to customers who are interconnected with the electric utilities distribution network. I just bring this up just because thinking through Passive House and what 2 folks associated with Passive House potentially care about, it's not for islanding systems. So you do have to be interconnected in order to take advantage of net metering. Only systems 2 megawatts or less. Municipal utilities and rural cooperatives, if you're putting up a project in those areas, you have to check with your local municipal utility or rural cooperative on their net metering policy. I had a friend whose roof burned down in St. Charles, and solar didn't make sense for him at that point because ultimately they didn't have net metering policy in place. That's probably about 5 years ago. So do check and make sure that your local utility does have net metering if you're in a meter co-op. As we mentioned previously, the retail rate applies for customers that are below 100 kilowatts in ComEd and less than 150 for Ameren. So small customers have more beneficial net metering terms. They get both the supply and the delivery rate or the retail rate credited back on their bills. That said, those credits do expire. They expire at the end of an annualized period, and you figure out what that annualized period is at the front end of signing up for net metering. It's either April or October of that year. Larger customers are generally only receiving net metering credits at the energy supply rate. One interesting note is that when we hit the net metering cap, as it's called, retail rate net metering will no longer be available to residential customers. That cap occurs at 5%, and there's some disagreement right now as to how you set the numerator and the denominator of that 5%, including potentially an approach where you're looking only at default supply customers for the numerator, but you're looking at potentially a different denominator. So that's something, or maybe it's the other way around, but in any event, there's something that's currently being contested there. So one thing that people may not know, though, is when you sign up for net metering, if you take supply from an alternative supplier, you're actually signing up through them. And the Commission's administrative rules requires there to be an application process on the supplier's website. For ComEd, it's fairly straightforward. It's going to be an easier process. But if you're taking service from an alternative supplier, you want to make sure that you look there and look for them. Interconnection is something that's come up a few times. Just wanted to have a slide to describe the process in high-level terms. Just know that interconnection comes first, then application for net metering comes, and interconnection is a prerequisite to participate in net metering and also to participate in the adjustable block program. In terms of how long net metering takes, under the Commission's administrative rules, it's a max of 27 business days, but in reality, I think we're seeing at least at present much shorter interconnection times for smaller systems. Yep.
So once we do reach that 5%, what will happen? What will happen to the customers that already had net metering?
So they can be grandfathered in. It doesn't affect them. It's only for new customers after the 5% is reached. And they'll still receive net metering at the supply rate. They'll also have the opportunity to take advantage of an incentive that hopefully I'll get into in the next couple of slides. So they're going to get supply rate net metering plus. It's just what that plus is still under discussion. Virtual net metering, we touched on previously too. This is something that's new through the Future Energy Jobs Act for community solar projects. Allows you to be credited your supply rate if you are a subscriber to the community solar project. Then there's a smart inverter rebate. This is a new concept introduced through the recent law mostly affects bigger projects for now, but allows you to get a $250 per kilowatt of nameplate capacity credit straight away from your electric utility. Available only to non-residential owners, and as part of that, you have to agree to use a smart inverter, and as I'll describe, because the utility has the ability to get some value out of it. So this level of 250 exists for now. It will be changed after the net metering cap is hit. Then that gets revisited, and that happens after the threshold date. Once we hit that net metering cap, then the commission comes in, as it hits 3%, they do a study to look at what would be a good value of solar. Then it hits 5%, that's the actual cap, and you have a new regime in place. And you'll have residential customers at that point able to take advantage of supply rate net metering, and then also take advantage of whatever the new number will be for the smart inverter rebate. And then as part of that also, there are uses for the smart inverters that the utility can take advantage of for things like voltage regulation. That's kind of part of the compact of receiving the smart inverter rebate, is they're effectively using this as a distribution system resource. So, what comes next? This is a lot of content that I've thrown at you, and we'll make this presentation available as well. We conducted our second initial forward procurement event last week. The results were approved today, and we have a third one that's coming up, I believe, in May. And those will produce hundreds of megawatts of new utility scale solar. The plan is approved on April 3rd. Then we go through the process of signing up third-party program administrators, building out the infrastructure of the program. Final rec price is published June 4th. We start finalizing consumer protection requirements, other requirements applicable to approved vendors. And hopefully approved vendors can start enrolling in the adjustable block program in the fall of 2018. And we hope that these blocks where people can actually come in and submit capacity projects, we hope that those will be opening within 180 to 240 days of the Commission's approval of the long-term plan. So that's the trajectory that we're on. We're hopeful that it will result in thousands of megawatts of new solar in Illinois. We think we have all the right pieces in place. We think the underlying law is on the right track. And we're hopeful that many of you in this room may be in a position to take advantage of it. So, yeah.
The panels have a lifespan far beyond 15 years. Are there
Yes.
any ideas what happens after 15-year contract?
We conduct other procurement processes to meet annual requirements for the RPS. So we have a 25% by 2025 RPS where RECs can bid in even if they're not under contract from other systems. So in theory, as the law stands right now, in year 16, they can be bid into other competitive procurement processes, winning the price at which they bid in. That said, we're talking about potentially 2035, and we really don't know what the underlying legislative regime will look like by then. 15 years ago, it certainly looks very different than it does now. So, yep.
Yeah, you mentioned sort of in passing that you used a lot of NREL research and that it was really, really important for you. And NREL is sort of in the sights of the Trump administration. They would like to cut its budget by 75%. If NREL shrinks, disappears, shrivels, how does that affect you? Who comes in and fills the gap for the kinds of information that you need?
I think it'll be interesting to see. It's not something that we've really talked about internally all that often. There are a few different places where you can get information on solar installation costs. NREL is probably the most prominent among them and the most reliable. Having said that, what we don't have the benefit of in Illinois right now is actual market experience at scale. We will get the benefit of that over the next 2-3 years. So we may be able to draw on some of our market experiences based on what's happened under rec prices that we set previously. And I think we can work around that.
Is there a way to tie in? I mean, there's such a university system. It's such a powerhouse in this state to actually work with them to fill the gaps that could happen.
I think that's very possible. Yeah, I think we could go there. We could look to different organizations, trade associations, others. What we're really looking for is an accurate understanding of what it costs to put solar in on someone's rooftop and essentially how much revenue they need back. And there's a number of inputs to that equation, but you want to be as precise as possible because you don't want to create a system that won't allow for the development of projects, but you also don't want to squander a bunch of money on margin for developers. And that's essentially what we're trying to do through how the rec prices are set. And what NREL is giving us is a set of data points that are inputs into that process, but they're not the only ones who have that sort of information. So I do think we could potentially work with the university or others if that were the case. Yep.
About 10 slides back that I had mentioned at the very bottom that you had credits. There we go.
Yep.
Credits expire at the end of the annual period of termination of service with the supplier. Good one. Right. can you take those credits, because you're not going to be able to consume those things if you build up a lot of credits. Can you transfer them to somebody?
Well, these are only for the net metering credits, which are done on an annual basis. So essentially, the amount of global production you have can be credited against future bills. Your RECs will still be able to be used if they're not under contract already, and you'll always have the renewable energy credit component, which is entirely separate from net metering. But in terms of the actual net metering credit, i.e. you have produced more off your system than you've actually consumed off of the grid, that just simply expires at the end of that period, or it terminates the supplier. There isn't another way that I'm aware of, at least, to monetize that or to transfer that.
So it's not carried over to the next year?
It's not carried over to the next year. It ends at the annualized period, and it may be less than a year when you sign up as well, because you're electing for the subsequent April or October. Yes, sir.
Is there any program, I'm on a 5-year rec system, it's going to expire. Is there any program that if you go through the 5 years, it's a 25-year system, do they have another program for picking up older systems that still generate?
Not yet, but a lot of those systems were developed in the 2016-2017 timeframe pursuant to our supplemental photovoltaic procurement and our distributed generation procurement. We're going to be updating our long-term plan in 2019 and also in 2021, and it's possible that this is the sort of issue that we would look at. If we're not developing a dedicated program, then we do conduct other competitive procurement events that those RECs can be bid into. So there are ways of monetizing them. And then there's other compliance markets. There's other folks who want to buy RECs, whether it's an Aries for a green product, whether it's a corporation for a sustainability goal, whatever else it might be. That REC will have value somewhere else, even if it's not through a program that the only power agency proposes.
If you add panels to the existing system, can you tie that together, maybe?
You can add panels to an existing system and have that portion be a new system if it's measured separately, but it can't make the entirety of the system new, unfortunately. Any other questions? Well, thank you. Sorry.
Well, that's all.
It was worse. That's good.
All right, what's interesting is looking out at the crowd is, I think we have just over 50 people here right now. So we've been doing this since 2010. Later on this year, we'll hit our 100th meetup group. The way in which we hit those meetup groups is, it's not about quantity, it's nothing to do with that. That's just because of the time that went by. But each of us through our daily lives, again, we have coworkers, associates, and clients. Please reach out to them. The content that we have is for all of us. Green and LEED, again, has made a household name. We need to keep on supporting all of them, and we need to keep on focusing on energy. That's why, one of the reasons you're here. Again, we're very happy to have you. We have usually a lot of question and answer period right now. I have a lot of questions. We've kind of overstayed our time limit, and I own that. That's on me. I'm very happy with these speakers again. We've been doing this since 2010, and we've never had, yeah, please. We've never had solar speakers. It seems almost crazy at this point to admit it, but we're honest people, we're going to admit it forward. Each of them has had side conversations with me already, and they've interpreted certain things from the crowd. They speak, and they do this all the time. And they're going to be sharing more content with each of you. In order to exchange that content, we really need you to be a part of that electronic newsletter. So again, you have to ask one of us. You have to give us that and then we'll put it forward. If you want the presentation, we'll put it forward. Everything is about sharing information. That's how we grow. Next month, Katrine Kleinberg, she is the queen of Passive House here in the U.S. She's the reason why we're all able to be here. She is going to be presenting. Wonderful lady, and she's going to blow your socks off. Literally, the content is incredible. And please come. If you can't come, come in spirit. And you do that by inviting others, right? That's a big yes, right?
Yeah.
So, what did I miss?
Energy code.
This is crazy important. So IECC 2015 had 3 ACH, air exchanges per hour. That's it internationally. Illinois, Chicago decided let's move it up to 5. We don't want that. We want 3. At least honor what IECC is. So we're under review right now. It comes out every 3 years. We're under review for IECC 2018. We would like to get in contact with you next Wednesday. We don't have time to do that between now and then, we're being honest. Next Wednesday, we will reach out to you, and you have until Friday to take that information and get it to a lot of people. You have to go through the phone book and push it out there. We're asking for 2 ACH. We're hoping they at least concede to following the policy of 3. So we're playing poker.
So we'll offer a position statement on this. Please review it, think carefully about it, and if you agree, please submit that as a comment. We want to basically make sure that our case is heard as equally as the people that ended up getting it raised to 5 last time. So this is very important if you care about energy efficiency, durability, quality building.
So I think we all owe a big round of applause to Lisa, Bill, and Brian. We will be going to Bottom Lounge on Lake Street because there's a lot of people that we need to have side conversations with. And some people are hungry. They have food there as well. Huge thanks to Sean Moran of Skender Construction for having us here. We appreciate it. We really do. All of our hosts allow us to have the space to do this. Lindsay has a comment over there.
I just wanted to welcome everyone to please post. I've seen y'all taking photos of the content here. Sharing is caring. Please post along on your social media feeds and get the word out, because the more, kind of in the vein that Mark is saying, the more that we can spread the word, the better. And we just want to get more people here and boost this up.
We get paid for this, Mark, but for you, if you give me a position statement before this Sunday, we'll read it. We average 100,000 people a week, so I'll read it on air for you and we'll do something and get it out.
Yes.
Before Sunday.
But I gotta get it before Sunday.
All right.
Okay.
Architects love deadlines.
We'll be sure to get you to get to the masses on Sunday. We appreciate it, Michael. And what is your show again?
It's the Greenpreneur Show, 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. every Sunday. iHeartRadio, DON, and some other stuff.
I will repost his stuff. I think a lot of you know I'm on LinkedIn. I will repost this stuff this weekend. I'll reach out to Jennifer and we'll try to get his stuff out so you can hear it. He has an audience. We need an audience to get this content. Is that everything?
That's everything. So thank you, Mark, for doing such a wonderful job tonight. Awesome MC. Forced you all to be here, and you're still here. Most of you probably know he turned 28 on Monday, something like that. So we're going to sing him happy birthday. You guys ready? All right. 1, a 2, a 3. Happy birthday to you.